Hello, everyone, and welcome to NAU Theater's Story Hour. This is our 10th broadcast, and today we are reading chapter books. And the books we are reading are A Modern Cinderella or A Little Old Shoe, The Story of Dr. Dolittle, The Five Little Peppers and How They Grew, and The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. Enjoy! Well, let's get started with our first chapter book. See you soon.
Hi friends, welcome back. It's Miss Haley again. Just a reminder of what we read before. John just admitted to his mother that he has feelings for Nan and that he wants to be with her, but his mother asked him to wait a year before he tells her. That way he doesn't ruin her life or upset her or anything like that. So Nan and the girls had gone over to John's mother's house, and John had seen Nan after telling his mom. So he's feeling very conflicted between what he is feeling versus what he knows that he should be feeling. So we'll pick up where we left off. Now tell us how and why and when you came. Take off your coat, my dear, and here are the old slippers. Why didn't you let us know you were coming so soon? How have you been? And what makes you so late tonight? Betsy, you needn't put on your bonnet. And oh, my dear boy, have you been to supper yet? Miss Lord was a quiet soul, and her flood of questions was purred softly in her son's ear, for being a woman, she must talk, and being a mother, must pet the one delight of her life, and make a little festival when the lord of the manor came home. A whole drove of fatted cows were metaphorically killed, and the banquet appeared with speed. John was not one of those romantic heroes who can go through 3 volumes of hair-breadth escapes without the faintest hint of that blessed institution. Dinner, therefore, like Lady Leatherbridge, he partook copiously of everything, while the 2 women beamed over each other, mouthful with an interest that enhanced its flavor, and urged upon him cold meat and cheese, pickles and pie, as if dyspepsia and nightmare were among the lost arts. Then he opened his budget of news and fed them. I was coming next month according to custom, but Philip fell upon and so tempted me that I was driven to sacrifice myself to the cause of friendship, and up we came tonight. He would not let me come here till we had seen your father, Nan, for the poor lad was pining for Laura, and hoping his good behavior for the past year would satisfy his judge and secure his recall. We had a fine talk with your father, and upon my life Philip seemed to have received the gift of tongues, for he made the most eloquent plea, which I've stored away for future use, I assure you. The old gentleman was very kind, told Philip he was satisfied with the success of his probation, that he should see Laura when he liked, and if all went well, should receive his reward in the spring. It must be a delightful sensation to know you have made a fellow creature as happy as those words made Phil tonight. John paused and looked musingly at the patronly teapot, as if he saw a wondrous future in its shine. Nan twinkled off the drops that rose at the thought of Laura's joy, and said with grateful warmth, "You see nothing of your own share in the making of that happiness, John, but we know it, for Philip has told Laura in his letters all that you have been to him, and I am sure there was other eloquence besides his own father granted all you say he has. Oh, John, I thank you very much for this." Miss Lord beamed a whole midsummer of delight upon her son, as she saw the pleasure these words gave him, though he answered simply, "I only tried to be a brother to him, Nan, for he had been the most kind to me. Yes, I said my little say tonight, and gave my testimony in behalf of the prisoner at the bar. A most merciful judge pronounced his sentence, and he rushed straight to Miss Lee's to tell Laura the blissful news. Just imagine the scene when he appears, and how Dee will open her wicked eyes and enjoy the spectacle of the disheveled lovers, the bridal-ex tears to stir the romance of the thing. She'll cry over it tonight, and caricature it tomorrow." And John let the laugh at the picture he had conjured up, to turn the thoughts of Dee's dangerous sister from himself. At 10, Nan retired to the depths of her old bonnet from a far different face from the one she brought of it. and John, resuming his hat, mounted guard. "Don't stay late, remember, John." And in Miss Lord's voice there was a warning tone that her son interpreted all right. "I'll not forget, mother." And he kept his word, for though Philip's happiness floated temptingly before him, and the little figure at his side had never seemed so dear, he ignored the bland winds, the tender night, and a set of seal upon his lips, thinking manfully within himself, "I see many signs of promise in her happy face, but I will wait and hope for a little longer, for her sake." "Where is father, Sally?" asked Nan as that functionary appeared, blinking owlishly but utterly repudiating the idea of sleep. "He went down to the garden, miss, when the gentleman cleared, being a little flustered by what's going on. Shall I fetch him in?" asked Sally, as irrelevantly as if her master were a bag of meal. "No, we will go ourselves." And slowly the two paced down the leaf-strewn walk. Fields of yellow grain were waving on the hillside, and where corn blades rustled in the wind, from the orchard came the scent of ripening fruit, and all the garden plots lay ready to yield up their humble offerings to the Master's hand. But in the silence of the night a greater reaper had passed by, gathering in the harvest of righteous life, and leaving only tender memories for the gleaners who had come so late. The old man sat in the shadow of his tree, his own hands planted, his fruit boughs, shoes readily, and its leaf still whispered the low lullaby that hushed him to his rest. "How fast he sleeps, poor father! I should have come before and made it pleasant for him." As she spoke, Nan lifted up the head bent down upon his breast, kissed his pallid cheek. "Oh, John, this is not sleep." "Yes, dear, the happiest he will ever know." For a moment the shadows flickered over three white faces, and the silence deepened solemnly. Then John reverently bore the pale shape in, and Nan dropped down beside it, saying with a rain of grateful tears, "He kissed me when I went, and said a last good night." For an hour steps went to and fro about her, many voices whispered near her, and skillful hands touched the beloved clay she held so fast. But one by one the busy feet passed out, one by one the voices died away, and human skills proved vain. Then Mrs. Lord drew the orphan to the shelter of her arms, soothing her with the mute solace of that motherly embrace. "Nan, Nan, here's Philip, come and see." The happy call re-echoed through the house, and Nan sprang up as if time for her grief were past. "I must tell them. Oh, my poor girls, how will they bear it? They have known little sorrow." But there is no need for her to speak. Other lips had spared her the hard task, for as she stirred to meet them, a sharp cry rent the air, steps rang up upon the stairs, and two wild-eyed creatures came into the hush of the familiar room, for the first time meeting with no welcome from their father's voice. With one impulse, Dee and Laura fled to Nan, and the sisters clung together in a silent embrace, more eloquent than words. John took his mother by the hand and led her from the room, closing the door upon the sacredness of grief. "Yes, we are poorer than we thought, but when everything is settled we shall get on very well. We can let a part of this great house and live quietly together until spring. Then Laura will be married, and Dee can go on their travels with them as Philip wishes her to do. She shall be cared for, so never fear for us, John." Nan said this as her friend parted from her a week later, after the saddest holiday he had ever known. "And what becomes of you, Nan?" he asked, watching the patient eyes that smiled when others would have wept. "I shall stay in the dear old house, for no other place would seem like home to me. I shall find some little child to love and to care for, and be quite happy till the girls come back and want me." John nodded wisely, and as he listened, went away prophesying within himself. "She shall find something more than a child to love, and God willing, shall be very happy till the girls come home, and cannot have her." And that is where we're going to leave off today. Thank you, everyone. See you guys later.
Thank you, Miss Haley Joe. I hope everyone is enjoying this Louisa May Alcott book, A Modern Cinderella or A Very Old Shoe. And next up, we are going to hear some more of a new story we've been reading called The Five Little Peppers and How They Grew. And that is being read by Miss Rebecca. Enjoy!
Hello, it's Miss Rebecca, and I'm going to put on my reading bonnet. Today, we'll be reading Chapter 2 of Five Little Peppers and How They Grew. Making Happiness for Mamsie. And so, the minute her mother had departed for the minister's house next morning, and Ben had gone to his day's work chopping wood for Deacon Blodgett, Polly assembled her force around the old stove and proceeded to business. She and the children had been up betimes that morning to get through with all the work, and now, as they glanced around with a look of pride on the neatly swept floor, the dishes all done and everything in order, the moment their mother's back was turned, they began to implore Polly to hurry and begin. "It's most 11 o'clock," said Joel, who, having no work to do outside that day, was prancing around, wild to help along with festivities. "It's most 11 o'clock, Polly Pepper. You won't have it done." "Oh, no, 'tisn't either, Joe," said Polly, with a very flushed face, and her arms full of kindlings, glancing up at the old clock as she spoke. "'Tisn't but 9:15. There, take care, Phronsie. You can't lift off the cover. Do help her, Davy." "No, let me," cried Joel, springing forward. "It's my turn. Dave got the shingles. It's my turn, Polly." "So 'tis," said Polly. "I forgot. There," as she flung in the wood and poked it all up in a nice little heap coaxingly. "It can't help but burn. What a cake we'll have for Mamsie." That means Mom. "It'll be so big," cried Phronsie, hopping around on one set of toes, "that Mamsie won't know what to do, will she, Polly?" "No, I don't believe she will," said Polly, gaily, stuffing in more wood. "Oh, dear, there goes Ben's putty. It's all come out." "So it has," said Joel, going around back of the stove to explore, and then he added cheerfully, "It's bigger'n ever. Oh, it's an awful big hole, Polly." "Now, whatever shall we do?" said Polly in great distress. "That hateful old crack, and Ben's clear off to Deacon Blodgett's." "I'll run and get him," cried Joel, briskly. "I'll bring him right home in 10 minutes. "Oh, no, you must not, Joe," cried Polly in alarm. "It wouldn't ever be right to take him off from his work. Mamsie wouldn't like it." "Well, what will you do then?" asked Joel, pausing on his way to the door. "I'm sure I don't know," said Polly, getting down on her knees to examine the crack. "I shall have to stuff it with paper, I suppose." "'Twon't stay in," said Joel scornfully. "Don't you know, stuffed it? You stuffed it before, like last week. You did." "I know," said Polly with a small sigh, and sitting down on the floor, she remained quite still for a minute, with her two black hands thrust out straight before her, all with soot. "Well, can't you fix it?" asked Davy, soberly, coming up. Then we can't have the cake." "Dear me," exclaimed Polly, springing up quickly. "Don't be afraid. We're going to have that cake. Don't you worry. There, you ugly old thing, you." This to the stove. "See what you've done?" As two big tears flew out of Phronsie's brown eyes at the direful prospect, and the sorrowful faces of the two boys looked up into Polly's own for comfort. "I can fix it. I most know. Do get some paper, Joe, as quick as you can." "Don't know where there is any," said Joel, rummaging around. "'Tis all torn up, except the almanac. Can I take that?" "Oh, dear, no," cried Polly. "Put it right back, Joe. I guess there's some in the woodshed?" "There isn't either," said little Davy quickly. "Joel and I took it to make kites with." "Oh, dear," groaned Polly. I don't know what we shall do unless—" As a bright thought struck her. "You let me have the kites, boys." "Can't," said Joel. "They're all flew away and torn up." Well now, children, said Polly, turning round impressively upon them, the effect of which was heightened by the extremely crocky appearance she had gained in her explorations. We must have some paper or something to stop up that old hole with, some way. There. I know, said little Davy. I know where we'll get it. It's upstairs. And without another word, he flew out of the room, and in another minute he put into Polly's hand an old leather boot top, one of his most treasured possessions. You can chip it, he said, real fine, and then 'twill go in. So we can, said Polly, and you're a real good boy, Davy, to give it. That's a splendid present to help celebrate for Mamsie. I'd have given a boot top, said Joel, looking grimly at the precious bit of leather, which Polly was rapidly stripping into little bits. If I'd had it, I don't have anything. I know you would, Joey, said Polly kindly. There now, you'll stay, I guess. As with the united efforts of the two boys, cheered on by Phronsie's enthusiastic little crow of delight, the leather was crowded into place and the fire began to burn. Now, boys, said Polly, getting up and drawing a long breath, I'm going over to Grandma Bascom's to get her to tell me how to make the cake, and you must stay and keep house. I'm going to nail, said Joel. I've got lots to do. All right, said Polly, trying on her hood. Phronsie'll love to watch. I won't be gone long. And she was off. Grandma Bascom wasn't really the children's grandmother. Only everybody in the village called her so by courtesy. Her cottage was over across the lane and just a bit around the corner, and Polly flew along and up to the door, fully knowing that now she would be helped out of her difficulty. She didn't stop to knock, as the old lady was so deaf she knew she wouldn't hear her, but opened the door and walked in. Grandma was sweeping up the floor, already as neat as a pin. When she saw Polly coming, she stopped and leaned on her broom. How's your ma? She asked when Polly had said good morning and then hesitated. Oh, Mammy's pretty well, shouted Polly into the old lady's ear, and tomorrow's her birthday. Tomorrow'll be a bad day, said Grandma. Oh, don't never say that. You mustn't borrow trouble, child. I didn't, said Polly. I mean, it's her birthday, Grandma. This laughed so loud that Grandma's cap border vibrated perceptibly. The land's sakes, 'tis, cried Mrs. Bascom delightedly. You don't say so. She must have not understood what Polly had said because of her hearing. Yes, it is, said Polly, skipping around the old lady and giving her a small hug, and we're going to have a surprise. What is the matter with her eyes? Asked Grandma sharply, turning around and facing her. She's been sewing. Too stiddy, ain't she? A surprise, shouted Polly, standing upon tiptoe to bring her mouth on a level with the old lady's ear. A cake, Grandma, a big one. A cake, exclaimed Grandma, dropping the broom to settle her cap, which Polly, in her extreme endeavors to carry on the conversation, had knocked slightly awry. Well, that'll be fine. Yes, said Polly, picking up the broom and flinging off her hood at the same time. And oh, won't you please tell me how to make it, Grandma? To be sure, cried the old lady, delighted beyond measure to give advice. I've got splendid receipts. I'll go get them right off. And she ambled to the door of the pantry. And I'll finish sweeping up, said Polly, which Grandma didn't hear, so she took up the broom and sent it energetically and merrily flying away to the tune of her own happy thoughts. Yes, they're right here, said Grandma, waddling back with an old tin teapot in her hand. Goodness, child, what a dust you've kicked up. That ain't the way to sweep. And she took the broom out of Polly's hand, who stood quite still in mortification. There, she said, drawing it mildly over the few bits she could scrape together and gently coaxing them into a little heap. That's the way. And then they don't go all over the room. I'm sorry, began poor Polly. Tain't any matter, said Mrs. Bascom kindly, catching sight of Polly's discomfited face. Tain't a mite of matter. You'll sweep better next time. Now let's go to the cake. And putting the broom into the corner, she waddled back again to the table, followed by Polly, and proceeded to turn out the contents of the teapot in search of just the right receipt. But the right one didn't seem to appear, not even after the teapot was turned upside down and shaken by both Grandma's and Polly's anxious hands. Every other receipt seemed to tumble out gladly and stare them in the face, little dingy rolls of yellow paper with an ancient odor of spice still clinging to them. But all efforts to find this particular one failed utterly. "Won't some other one do?" asked Polly in the interval of fruitless searching, when Grandma bewailed and lamented and wondered where I could have put it. "No, no, child," answered the old lady. "Now, where do you suppose 'tis?" And she clapped both hands to her head to see if she could possibly remember. "No, no, child," she repeated. "Why, they had it down to my niece Mirandy's wedding. 'Twas just elegant, like a feather she was, and 'twain't. It just wasn't very rich, but it was great. There were no eggs." "Oh, I couldn't have had eggs," cried Polly, in amazement at the thought of such luxury. Eggs are apparently a luxury. I could not have had eggs. And we would only have had, well, brown flour, Grandma. "Well, you can make it of brown," said Mrs. Bascom kindly, um, when the raisins is in, it'll look nice. Oh, we haven't any raisins." "Well, you haven't any raisins?" echoed Grandma, looking at her over her spectacles. "What are you going to put in?" "Oh, cinnamon," said Polly briskly. "We've got plenty of that, and it'll be good, I guess, Grandma," she finished anxiously. "Anyway, we must have a cake. There isn't any other way to celebrate Mamsie's birthday." "Well, now," said Grandma, bustling around, "I shouldn't be surprised if you had real good luck, Polly, and your ma said ever so much by it. Now, if we only could find that receipt." And returning to the charge, she commenced to fumble among her bits of paper again. "I shall never forget how they eat on it. Why, that cake at that wedding, there wasn't a crumb left, Polly." "Oh, dear," said Polly, to whom Miranda's wedding cake now became the height of her desires. "If you only can find it, can't I climb up and look in the pantry shelves?" "Maybe 'tis there," said Mrs. Bascom slowly. "You might try." "Yes, you might try. So sometimes I do put things away so as to have them safe." So Polly got an old wooden chair, according to direction, and then mounted up on it, with Grandma below to direct. She handed down bowl after bowl, interspersed at the right intervals with cracked teacups and handless pitchers. But at the end of these explorations, Miranda's wedding cake was further off than ever. "'Tain't a mite o' use," at last said the old lady, sinking down in despair, while Polly perched on the top of the chair and looked at her. "I must have given it away." "Can't I have the next best one, then?" asked Polly, despairingly, feeling sure that Miranda's wedding cake would have celebrated the day just right. "And I must hurry home, and," she added, getting down from the chair and tying on her hood. "Oh, or Phronsie won't know what to do. Phronsie's the littlest, I think." So another receipt was looked over, and recipe is, I think, the word that we know and that maybe she's trying to say. But she has this funny way of saying it. She just says receipt. So another receipt was looked over and selected. And with many charges and bits of advice not to let the oven get too hot, etc., etc., Polly took the precious bits in her hand and flew over home. "Now we've got to," she began, bounding in merrily with dancing eyes, but her delight had a sudden stop as she brought up so suddenly at the sight within that she couldn't utter another word. Phronsie was crouching, a miserable little heap of woe, in one corner of the mother's big calico-covered rocking chair and crying bitterly, while Joel hung over her in the utmost concern. "What's the matter?" gasped Polly, flinging the receipt on the table. She rushed up to the old chair and was down on her knees before it, her arms around the little figure. Phronsie turned and threw herself into Polly's protecting arms, who gathered her up and, sitting down in the depths of the chair, comforted her as only she could. "What is it?" she asked of Joel, who was nervously begging Phronsie not to cry. "Now tell me all that's happened." "I was a-nailing," began Joel. Oh, dear, don't cry, Phronsie. Do stop her, Polly." "Go on," said Polly. "I was a-nailing, and David's gone to get the peppermint," he added, brightening up. Tell me, Joe, said Polly. Tell me all that's been going on. And she looked sternly into his face, or I'll get Davy to. As little Davy came running back with a little bottle of castor oil, which in his flurry he had mistaken for peppermint. This he presented with a flourish to Polly, who was too excited to see it. Oh, no, cried Joel in an intense alarm. Davy isn't going to. I'll tell Paul. I will, truly. I have no idea what's going on. You might not either. That's okay. Let's see what else happens. Go on then, Polly. Well, feeling as if somebody didn't tell quickly, Polly might tumble over, Joel said, the old hammer was a-shaking, and Phronsie stuck her foot in the way, and I couldn't help it, Polly. No, I just couldn't. I couldn't help it, Polly. Quick as a flash, Polly tore off the little old shoe and well-worn stocking and brought to light Phronsie's fat little foot. Tenderly taking hold of the white toes, the boys clustering around in the greatest anxiety, she worked them back and forth and up and down. Nothing's broken, she said at last, and drew a long breath. It's there, said Phronsie through a rain of tears, and it hurts, Polly. And she began to wiggle the big toe, where around the nail was settling a small black spot. Poor little toe, began Polly, cuddling up the suffering foot. Just then, a small and peculiar noise struck her ear, and looking up, she saw Joel, with a very distorted face, making violent efforts to keep from bursting out into a loud cry. All his attempts, however, failed, and he flung himself into Polly's lap in a perfect torrent of tears. I didn't mean to, Polly, he cried. 'Twas the ugly old hammer. Oh, dear. There, Joey, dear, said Polly, gathering him up in the other corner of the chair, close to her side. Don't feel bad. I know you didn't mean to. And she dropped a kiss on his stubby black hair. When Phronsie saw that anybody else could cry, she stopped immediately, and leaning over Polly, put one little fat hand on Joel's neck. Don't cry, she said. Does your toe ache? At this, Joel screamed louder than ever, and Polly was at her wit's end to know what to do, for the boy's heart was almost broken. That he should have hurt poor Phronsie, the baby, the pet of the whole house, upon whom all their hearts centered, it was too much. So, for the next few moments, Polly had all she could do by way of comforting and consoling him. Just as she had succeeded, the door opened, and Grandma Bascom walked in. Settin' down, said she. I hope your cake ain't in, Polly, looking anxiously at the stove, for I've found it. And she waved a small piece of paper triumphantly towards the rocking chair as she spoke. Do tell her, said Polly to little David, what's happened, for I can't get up. So little Davy went up to the old lady and, standing on tiptoe, screamed into her ear all the particulars of what had happened concerning the accident. Hey, said Grandma, in a perfect bewilderment. What's he a-saying, Polly? I can't make it out. You'll have to go all over it again, David, said Polly despairingly. She didn't hear one word, I don't believe. So David tried again, this time with a little better success, and then he got down from his tiptoes and escorted Grandma to Phronsie in flushed triumph. Land alive, said the old lady, sitting down in the chair which he brought her. You got pounded, did you? Looking at Phronsie as she took the little foot in her ample hand. Yes'm, said Polly quickly. 'Twasn't anyone's fault. What'll we do for it, Grandma? Wormwood, said the old lady, adjusting her spectacles in extreme deliberation, and then examining the little black and blue spot, which was spreading rapidly. Wormwood is the very best thing, and I've got some at home. You run right over, she said, turning round on David quickly, and get it. It's hanging in by the chimbley. Let me, cried Joel, springing out of the old chair so suddenly that Grandma's spectacles nearly dropped off in fright. Oh, I want to do it for Phronsie. Yes, let Joel, please, put in Polly. He'll find it, Grandma. So Joel departed with great speed and presently returned with a bunch of dry herbs while that was fast. Which dangled comfortingly by his side as he came in. Now I'll fix it, said Mrs. Bascom, getting up and taking off her shawl. There's a few raisins for you, Polly. I don't want 'em, and they'll make your cake go better. And she placed a little parcel on the table as she spoke. Yes, I'll put it to steep, and after it's put on real strong and tied up in an old cloth, Phronsie won't know as she's got any toes at all. And Grandma broke up a generous supply of the herbs and put it into an old tin cup, which she covered up with a saucer and placed on the stove. "Oh," said Polly, "I can't thank you. I can't thank you enough for the raisins and all. You're so good." "They're awfully hard," said Joel, investigating into the bundle with Davy, which, however, luckily the old lady didn't hear. "There, don't try," she said cheerily. "And I found Cousin Mirandy's wedding cake receipt for—" "Did you?" cried Polly. "Oh, I'm so glad," feeling as if that were comfort enough for a good deal. "Yes, 'twas in my Bible," said Mrs. Bascom. "I remember now. I put it there to be ready to give John's folks when they came in. They wanted it. So you'll go all straight now, and I must get home, for I left some meat a-boiling." So Grandma put on her shawl and waddled off, leaving a great deal of comfort behind her. "Now, says I," said Polly to Phronsie, when the little foot was snugly tied up in the wet wormwood, "you've got to have one of Mamsie's old slippers." "Oh," laughed Phronsie, "won't that be funny, Polly?" I should think it would," laughed Polly, back again, pulling on the big cloth slipper, which Joel produced from the bedroom, the two boys joining uproariously as the old black thing flapped dismally up and down and showed strong symptoms of flying off. Well, we shall have to tie it on." "It looks like a pudding bag," said Joel, as Polly tied it securely through the middle with a bit of twine. "An old black pudding bag," he finished. "Old black pudding bag?" echoed Phronsie. Oh, that was Phronsie. "Old black pudding bag?" Oh, that kind of became the grandma, didn't it? Let's go back to Phronsie. "Old black pudding bag?" That was a little better. So Phronsie said old black pudding bag, exclamation mark. And then all of a sudden she grew very sober, Phronsie did, and looked intently at the foot thrust out straight before her as she sat still in the chair. "What is it, Phronsie?" asked Polly, who was bustling around making preparations for the cake making. "Can I ever wear my shoes again?" asked the child gravely, looking dismally at the black bundle before her. "Oh, yes, my goodness, yes," cried Polly. "As quick and again as ever, you'll be around and smart as a cricket, probably just in a week. See if you aren't." "Will it go on?" asked Phronsie, still looking incredulously at the bundle. "And button up even?" "Yes, indeed," cried Polly again. "Button into every one of the little holes, Phronsie Pepper, just as elegant as ever." "Oh," said Phronsie, and then she gave a sigh of relief and thought no more of it because Polly had said that all would be right. That was chapter 2 of 5 Little Peppers and How They Grew.
Hi, everybody. Next up is The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood with Miss Charlie. Enjoy!
Hi, guys. So today we're continuing with the Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. And last time we read a chapter about the Tinker and how the Tinker came to join the forces of Robin Hood and his merry men in the forest. Today we'll be starting the chapter, The Shooting Match at Nottingham Town. The sheriff was very wroth because of his failure to take Jolly Robin, for it came to his ears, as ill news always does, that people laughed at him and made jest of his thinking to serve a warrant upon such one as the bold outlaw. And a man hates nothing so much as being made jest of. So he said, "Our gracious lord and sovereign king himself shall know of this, and how the laws are perverted and despised by this band of rebel outlaws. As for your traitor Tinker, him I will hang, if I catch him, upon the highest gallows tree in all of Nottinghamshire." Then he bade all of his servants and retainers to make ready to go to London town, to see and speak with the king. At this there was bustling at the sheriff's castle, and men ran hither and thither upon the business and upon that, while the forge fires of Nottingham glowed red far into the night like twinkling stars, for all the smiths of the town were busy making or mending armor for the sheriff's troop of escort. For 2 days this labor lasted. Then, on the third, all was ready for the journey.
And so forth they started with the bright sunlight from Nottingham town to Fosse Way, and thence to Watling Street. So they journeyed for 2 days, until they saw at last the spires and towers of great London town. And many folks stopped, as they journeyed along, and gazed at the show they made riding along the highways with their flashing armor and gay plumes and trappings. In London, King Henry and his fair Queen Eleanor held their court, gay with ladies in silks and satins and velvets and cloth of gold, and also brave knights and gallant courtiers. Thither came the sheriff, and was shown into the king's presence. A boon, quoth he, as he knelt upon the ground. Now what wouldst thou have? Said the king. Let us hear what thou may be desires. Oh, good my lord and sovereign, spake the sheriff, in Sherwood Forest, in our own good shire of Nottingham, liveth a bold outlaw whose name is Robin Hood. In good sooth, said the king, his doings have reached even our royal ears. He is a saucy, rebellious varlet, yet, I am fain to own, a right merry soul withal. But hearken, O my gracious sovereign, said the sheriff, I sent a warrant to him to have thine own royal seal attached by a right lusty knave, but he beat the messenger and stole the warrant, and he killeth thy deer and robbeth thine own liege subjects, even upon thy great highways. Why, how now, quoth the king wrathfully, what wouldst thou have me do? Comest thou not to me with a great array of men-at-arms and retainers, and yet thou art not able to take a single band of lusty knaves without armor on a breast in thine own county? What wouldst thou have me do? Art thou not my sheriff? Are thou laws in force not in Nottinghamshire? Canst thou not take thine own course against thou that break those laws, or do any injury or thine? Get thee gone, and get thee well. Devise some plan of thine own, but trouble me no further. But look well to do it, master sheriff, for I will have my laws obeyed by men within my kingdom, and if thou art not able to enforce them, thou art no sheriff to me. So look well to thyself, I say, or ill may befall thee as well as thieving knaves in Nottinghamshire. When the flood cometh, it sweepeth away the grain as well as chaff. Then the sheriff turned away with a sore and troubled heart, and sadly he rued his fine show of retainers, for he saw the king was angry, because he had so many men about him, yet could not enforce the laws. So, as they all rode slowly back to Nottingham, the sheriff was thoughtful and full of care. Not a word did he speak to anyone, and no one of his men spoke to him, but all the time he was busy devising some plan to take Robin Hood. Aha! Cried he suddenly, smiting his hand upon his thigh. I have it now! Ride on, my merry men, and let us back to Nottingham town as speedily as we may. And mark well my words, before a fortnight is past, the evil knave Robin Hood will be safely clapped in Nottingham Gaol. But what was the sheriff's plan? As a usurer takes each one bag of silver angles, feeling each coin to find whether it had been clipped or not, so the sheriff, as he rode slowly and sadly back to the town of Nottingham, took up thought after every turn, feeling around the edges for each, but finding every one some flaw. At last he thought of the daring soul of Jolly Robin, and how, as he the sheriff knew, he often came within the walls of Nottingham. Now, thought the sheriff, I could but persuade Robin nigh to enter Nottingham town so that I could find him, I would warrant I would lay hands upon him so stoutly he would never get away again. Then of a sudden it came to him like a flash that were he to proclaim a great shooting match and offer some grand prize, Robin Hood might be over-persuaded by his spirit to come to the butts. And it was this thought which caused him to cry, "Aha!" and smite his palm upon his thigh. So, as soon as he returned safely to Nottingham, he sent messengers north and south, and east and west, to proclaim through town, hamlet, and countryside, that this grand shooting match, and everyone was bidden that could draw a longbow, and the prize was to be an arrow of pure beaten gold. When Robin Hood first heard the news, he was in Lincoln town, and hastening back to Sherwood Forest, he soon called all his merry men about him and spoke to him thus: "Now hearken, my merry men, to all the news that I have brought from Lincoln town today. Our friend the Sheriff of Nottingham hath proclaimed a shooting match, and hath sent messengers to tell of it through all the countryside, and the prize is to be a bright golden arrow. Now I fain I would have one of us win, both because the fairness of the prize, and because our sweet friend the Sheriff hath offered it. So we will take our bows and shafts and go there to shoot, for I know right well that merriment will be a-going. What say ye, lads?" And then young David of Doncaster spoke up and said, "Now listen, I pray thee, good master, unto what I say. I have come straight here from our friend Edawam of the Blue Boar, and I know there I heard full news of the same match. But master, I know from him, and he has got it on the sheriff's man Ralph, that the same knavish sheriff hath but laid a trip for thee in this shooting match, and wishes nothing so much as to see thee there. So go not, good master, for I know right well he doth seek to beguile thee, but stay within the greenwood, lest we all meet dole and woe." "Now," quoth Robin, "thou art a wise lad, and keepest thine ears open and thy mouth shut, and becometh a wise and crafty woodsman. But we shall let it be that said that the Sheriff of Nottingham did cow bold Robin Hood, and 7 good score as fair archers are in all of merry England. Nay, good David, what tellest thou maketh me desire the prize even more than what I should do. But what saith our good gossip Swantold? Is it not a hasty man burneth his mouth, that the fool keepeth his eyes shut, as he falleth into the pit? Now say he truly, therefore we must meet a guile with guile. Now some of you cloth yourselves as curtal friars, and some as rustic peasants, and some as tinkers or beggars, but see each man taketh a good bow or broadsword, in case the need should arise. As for myself, I will shoot for this same golden arrow, and should I win it, we will hang it to the branches for our good greenwood tree, for the joy of all the band. How thou like the plan, my merry men all?" Then "Good, good!" cried all the band right heartily. A fair sight was Nottingham town on the day of the shooting match. All came upon the greenwood meadow. Beneath the town wall stretched a row of benches, one above the other, where there were knight and lady, squire and dame, rich burghers and their wives. For none but those of rank and quality were there to sit. At the end of the range, near the target, was a raised seat bedecked with ribbons and scarves and garlands of flowers, for the Sheriff of Nottingham and his dame. The range was 20 paces broad. At one end stood the target, and at the other a tent of striped canvas, from the pole of which fluttered many-colored flags and streamers. In this booth were casks of ale, free to be broached by any of the archers who might wish to quench their thirst. Across the range, from where the seats of the better folk were raised, was a railing to keep the poorer people from crowding in front of the target. Already, while it was early, the benches were beginning to fill with people of quality, who kept constantly arriving in little carts upon paley fries that curveted gaily to the merry tinkle of silver bells and bridal reins. While with these came also the poorer folk, who sat or lay upon the green grass near the railing that kept them off the range. In In the great tent the archers were gathering by twos and threes, some talking loudly of fair shots each man had made in his day, some looking to their bows, drawing a string betwixt the fingers to see there was no fray upon it, or inspecting arrows, shutting one eye and peering down the shaft to see that it was not warped, but straight and true, for neither bow nor shaft should fail at such a time for such a prize. And never was such a company of yeomen as were gathered at Nottingham town that day, for the very best of archers of merry England had come to this shooting match. There was Gill of the Red Cap, the sheriff's own head archer, and Dickon of Lincoln town, and Adam of the Dell, and a man of Tamworth of 60 years and more, yet hale his lusty still, who was in his time had shot in the most famous match at Woodstock, and there had beaten the renowned archer. And many famous men of the longbow were there, whose names had been handed down to us in goodly ballads in olden time. But now all the benches were filled with guests, and the lord and lady, burgher and dame, with the sheriff himself came his lady, he riding stately upon the milk-white horse, and she upon her brown filly. Upon his head he wore a purple velvet cap, and purple velvet was his robe, all trimmed with rich ermine. His jerkin and hose were of sea-green silk, and his shoes of black velvet. His pointed toes fastened to his garters with golden chains. A golden chain hung around his neck, and his collar was a great carbuncle set in red gold. His lady was dressed in blue velvet, all trimmed with swan's down. So they made a gallant sight as they rode side by side, and all the people shouted from where they crowded across the space with the gentlefolk. So the sheriff and his lady came their place, where men-at-arms with hauberk and spear stood about waiting for them. Then the sheriff and his dame sat down. He bade his herald wind upon his silver when upon his silver horn, who thereupon sounded 3 blasts that came echoing cheerily from the grey walls of Nottingham. Then the archers stepped forth to their places, while all folks shouted with a mighty voice, each man calling upon his favourite yeoman. "Red Cap!" cried some. "Crookshank!" cried other. "Hey for William O'Leslie!" shouted others yet again, while ladies waved silken scarves to urge each yeoman to do his best. Then the herald stood forth and loudly proclaimed the rules of the game as follows. "Shoot each man from yon mark, which is 70 yards and 10 from the target. 1 arrow shooteth each man first, and from all the archers that then 10 shooteth the fairest shaft shall be chosen to shoot again. 2 arrows shooteth each man from these 10, and then 3 shall shoot the 3 that shoot the fairest shafts shall be chosen to shoot again. 3 arrows shooteth each man for the prize, and to him given that shooteth the fairest shafts shall the prize be given." Then the sheriff leaned forward, looking keenly among the press archers to find whether Robin Hood was among them, but no one there was clad in Lincoln green, such as worn by Robin and his band. "Nevertheless," cried the sheriff to himself, "he may still be here, and I miss him among the crowd of other men. But let me see when 10 men shoot, for I wot he will be among the 10, or I know him not." So that's our chapter for today. And next time we'll see how that shooting match turns out and whether or not Robin Hood gets caught.
Well, next up is the story of Dr. Dolittle, which I am going to read to you. And today we are going to find out what a push-me-pull-you is. Finally! So, 1 second. We have with us our friend, Dr. Dolittle. And again, if you've been listening in with us as we've been reading the chapters, Dr. Dolittle is a doctor, and he was a medical doctor, but he really liked animals, and he had so many of them in his yard and in his house that all the patients stopped coming, the people patients. So his bird, Polynesia, suggested to him that he learn to be a doctor for animals. And then Polynesia taught him how to speak to the animals and to understand their languages. So he became very famous and a very good animal doctor. And sadly, a whole bunch of monkeys in Africa were getting sick, and they had heard about this guy. And so they sent for him by having the swallows fly all the way to Puddleby, England, to tell him that they needed him to help save those monkeys' lives. So he and a bunch of his animals went to Africa, where they cured the monkeys, got the help of all the prey animals like lions and tigers and leopards and all of those things. And that's kind of where we left off. He's ready to go back to Puddleby because he borrowed money and he borrowed things like the ship that broke apart to help these monkeys to get to Africa to help these monkeys. So he needs to get back and pay people back because he's a very honorable man. So that's where we left off. He's ready to go to Puddleby. But the monkeys want to give him a gift, and they have settled on a push me, pull you. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to read chapter, what is it? It's the 10th chapter, and it's called The Rarest Animal of All. So stay tuned. The 10th chapter, The Rarest Animal of All. Push-me-pull-yous are now extinct. That means there aren't any of them left anymore. But long ago, when Dr. Dolittle was alive, there were some of them still left in the deepest jungles of Africa. And even then, they were very, very scarce. They had no tail, but a head at each end and sharp horns on their heads. They were very, very shy and terribly hard to catch. The African men would get most of their animals by sneaking up behind them while they were not looking. But you couldn't do this with a push-me-pull-you. Only one half of him slept at a time. The other head was always awake and watching. This was why they were never caught and never seen in zoos. Though many of the greatest huntsmen and the cleverest menagerie keepers spent years of their lives searching through the jungles in all weathers for push-me-pull-yous, not a single one had ever been caught. Even then, years ago, he was the only animal in the world with two heads. Well, the monkeys set out hunting for this animal through the forest. After they had gone a good many, many miles, one of them found peculiar footprints near the edge of the river. And they knew that the push-me-pull-you must be very near that spot. Then they went along the bank of that river a little way, and they saw a place where the grass was high and thick, and guessed that that was where he was. So they all joined hands and made a giant circle around the grass. The push-me-pull-you heard them coming, and he tried hard to break through the ring of monkeys, but he couldn't do it. When he saw that it was no use trying to escape, he sat down and waited to see what they wanted. They asked him if he would go with Dr. Dolittle to be put on a show in the land of men. but he shook both his heads and said, "Certainly not." They explained to him that he would not be shut up in a menagerie, but would be looked after. They told him that the doctor was a very kind man, but hadn't any money, and people would pay to see a two-headed animal, and that the doctor would get rich and could pay for a boat that he borrowed to come to Africa in. But the push-me-pull-you answered, "No, you know I'm very shy. I hate being stared at." He almost began to cry. Then for 3 days they tried to persuade him. At the end of the third day, he said he would come with them and see what the kind of man this Dr. Dolittle was first. So the monkeys traveled back with the push-me-pull-you. And when they came to see the doctor in his little house, his little grass house, they knocked on the door. The duck, who was packing the trunk, said, "Come in." And Chi-Chi very proudly took the animal, the push-me-pull-you, inside and showed him to the doctor. "What in the world?" asked John Dolittle, gazing at the strange creature. "Lord save us!" cried the duck. "How does it make up its mind?" "It doesn't look to me as though it had any," said Jip the dog. "The doctor," said Chi-Chi, "this is the push-me-pull-you, the rarest animal of all the African jungles, the only two-headed beast in the world. Take him home with you, and your fortune's made. People will pay any money to see him." "But I don't want any money," said the doctor. "Yes, you do," said Dab-Dab the duck. "Don't you remember we have to pinch and scrape to pay the butcher's bill and Puddleby? And how are you going to get the sailor a new boat that you spoke of? Hop, hop, unless we have money to buy it." "I was going to make him one," said the doctor. "Oh, do be sensible," cried Dab-Dab. "Where would you get all the wood and the nails to make one with? And besides, what are we going to live on? We shall be poorer than ever when we get back. Chi-Chi's perfectly right. Take the funny-looking thing along. Do!" "Well, perhaps there's something in what you say," murmured the doctor. "It certainly would make a nice kind of pet. But does, what do you call it? Does it really want to go abroad?" "Yes, I'll go," said the push-me-pull-you, who saw at once from the doctor's face that he was a man to be trusted. "You have been so kind to the animals here, and the monkeys tell me that I'm the only one who will do. But you must promise me that if I do not like the land of these men, you will send me back home." "Why, certainly, of course," said the doctor. "Excuse me, surely you are related to the deer family, are you not?" "Yes," said the push-me-pull-you, "to the Abyssinian gazelles of the Asiatic chamois on my mother's side. My father's great-grandfather's side was the last of the unicorns." "Most interesting," murmured the doctor, and he took a book out of his trunk, which Dab-Dab was packing, and began turning the pages. "Let's see if Buffoon says anything. I notice," said the duck, "that you only talk with one of your mouths. Can't the other head talk as well?" "Oh, yes," said the push-me-pull-you, "but I keep the other mouth shut for eating mostly. In that way, I can talk while I'm eating without being rude. Our people always have been very polite. When the packing was finished and everything was ready to start, the monkeys gave a grand party for the doctor. And all the animals of the jungle came. And they had pineapples and mangoes and honey and all sorts of good things to eat and drink. After they all had finished eating, the doctor got up and said, "My friends, I am not clever at speaking long words after dinner like some men, but I have just eaten many fruits and much honey. But I wish to tell you that I'm very sad at leaving your beautiful country, because I have things to do in the land of my men. I must go. After I've gone, remember to never let the flies settle on your food before you eat it. And do not sleep on the ground when the rains are coming. I hope you all live happily ever after." When the doctor stopped speaking and sat down, all the monkeys clapped their hands for a long time and said to one another, "Let it be remembered always among our people that he sat and ate with us right here under these trees. For surely he is the greatest of men." And the grand gorilla, who had the strength of 7 horses in his hairy arms, rolled a great rock up to the head of the table and said, "This is the stone for all time shall mark the spot." And even to this day, in the heart of the jungle, that stone is still there. And monkey mothers passing through the forest with their families still point down at it from the branches and whisper to their children, "Shh, there it is, look, where the good man sat and ate with us in the year of the great sickness." Then, when the party was over, the doctor and his pets started out to go back to the seashore. And all the monkeys went with him as far as the edge of their country, carrying his trunk and bags to see him off. The 11th chapter, The Prince. If you remember, Dr. Dolittle, the Push-Me-Pull-You, and all the pets have to go back through the land of Jolinki in order to get to the seashore and then to figure out how they're going to get home. So here we go. The Prince. By the edge of the river, they stopped and said farewell. This took a long time because all the thousands of monkeys wanted to shake the hand of John Dolittle. Afterwards, when the doctor and his pets were going on alone, Polynesia said, "We must tread softly and talk low as we go through the land of Jolinki. If the king hear us, he'll send his soldiers to catch us again, for I am sure he is still very angry over the trick I played on him." "What I am wondering," said the doctor, "is where we are going to get another boat to go home in. Oh well, perhaps we'll find one lying on the beach that nobody is using." One day, while they were passing through a thick part of the forest, Chi-Chi went ahead of them to look for coconuts. And while he was away, the doctor and the rest of the animals, who did not know the jungle paths very well, they got so lost deep in the woods. They wandered around and around, but could not find their way down to the seashore. Chi-Chi, when he could not see them anymore, was terribly upset. He climbed high in the trees and looked out from the top of the branches to try to see the doctor and his high hat. He waved and he shouted. He called to all the animals, called them by name, but it was no use. They seemed to have disappeared altogether. Indeed, they had just lost their way very badly. They had strayed a long way off the path, and the jungle was so thick with bushes and creepers and vines that sometimes they could hardly move at all. And the doctor had to take out his pocket knife and cut his way along. They stumbled into wet, boggy places. That means kind of soupy like a sponge. And they got all tangled up. He nearly lost his medicine bag under a bush. There seemed no end to their troubles, and nowhere could they find the path. At last, after blundering about like this for many days, getting their clothes torn and their faces covered with mud, they walked right into the king's back garden by mistake. The king's men came running up at once and caught them. But Polynesia flew into a tree in the garden without anybody seeing her, and she hid herself. The doctor and the rest were taken before the king. "Ha, ha, ha, ha," cried the king. "So you're caught again. This time you shall not escape. Take them all back to the prison, but double locks on the doors. This man shall scrub my kitchen floor for the rest of his life." So the doctor and his pets were led back to the prison and locked up, and the doctor was told that in the morning he would begin scrubbing the kitchen floor. They were all very unhappy. "This is a great nuisance," said the doctor. "I really must get back to Puddleby. The poor sailor will think that I've stolen his ship if I don't get home. I wonder if those hinges are loose." But the door was very strong and firmly locked. There seemed no chance of his getting out. Then Gub-Gub began to cry again. All this time, Polynesia was sitting in the tree in the palace garden. She was saying nothing, but blinking her eyes. This was always a very bad sign for Polynesia. Whenever she said nothing and blinked her eyes, it meant that somebody had been making trouble, and she was thinking of some way to put things right. People who made trouble for Polynesia or her friends were nearly always sorry afterwards. Presently she spied Chi-Chi, swinging through the trees, still looking for the doctor. When Chi-Chi saw her, he came into her tree and asked her what had become of him. "The doctor and all the animals have been caught by the king's men and locked up again," whispered Polynesia. "We lost our way in the jungle and blundered the palace gardens by mistake." "But couldn't you guide him?" said Chi-Chi, and he began to scold the parrot for letting them get lost while he was away looking for cocoa nuts. "It's all the stupid pig's fault," said Polynesia. "He would keep running off the path, hunting for ginger roots, and I was kept busy catching him and bringing him back, that I turned to the left instead of the right when we reached the swamp. Shh, shh, there's the prince coming into the garden. He must not see us. Don't move, whatever you do." And there, sure enough, was the prince, the king's son, opening the garden gate. He carried a book of tales under his arm. He came strolling down the gravel walk, humming a sad song, till he reached the stone seat right under the tree where the parrot and the monkey were hiding. Then he lay down on the seat and began reading the tales, the stories to himself. Chi-Chi and Polynesia watched him, keeping very quiet and very still. After a while, the king's son laid the book down and sighed a weary sigh. "If I were only not the prince," he said, with a dreamy, faraway look in his eyes. Then the parrot, talking in a small, high voice like a little girl, said aloud, "Prince, someone might turn thee into a prince, perchance." Take two. "Prince, someone might turn you into a different prince, perchance." The king's son started up off the seat and looked all around. "What's this I hear? Methought the sweet music of a fairy's silver voice rang from yonder bower. Strange." "Worthy prince," said Polynesia, keeping very still so that he couldn't see her, "thou wouldst say winged words of truth, for 'tis I, Tripstinka, the queen of the fairies, that speaks to thee. I am hiding in a rosebud." "Oh, tell me, fairy queen," clasping his hands with joy, "who is it that can turn me into a different prince?" "In thy father's prison," said the parrot, "lies a famous wizard, John Dolittle by name. Many things he knows of medicine and magic, and mighty deeds that he has performed. Yet thy kingly father leaves him languishing long and lingering hours. Go to him, brave prince, secretly, when the sun is set, and behold, thou shalt be made a new prince, and you will have win a fair, fair lady, or a fairy. I have said enough. I must go now to fairyland. Farewell." "Farewell," said the prince. "1,000 thanks, good Tripstinka." And he sat down on the seat again with a smile on his face, waiting for the sun to set. So what do you think's going to happen next? Aha, you'll have to wait and see. That's all the time we have left today. So our next broadcast will be more of these chapter books. Until then, keep reading.